24-year-old Chloe Driver is currently being tried for unaliving her 1-year-old daughter. Now, before I go into day 4 of this trial, I am going to give you guys a quick recap. Chloe Driver was arrested for unaliving, as I mentioned, her 1-year-old daughter. Now, the prosecution's opening statements were stating that, yes, she was in a cult. She was one of 3 wives. And, well, she was jealous. She wanted her husband all to herself. And that's why she tried to unalive herself and she unalived her daughter. Defense is stating absolutely not. That was not the case. In fact, yes, she was in a cult, but she was also mentally unstable. She asked for help for so long and nobody would help her. In fact, the reason they wouldn't help her is because this particular cult does not believe in modern medicine. And she was breastfeeding her 1-year-old daughter. So when she shared with her husband, the other wives, because they have 2 additional wives, and their friend that she needed help, he stated, absolutely not. You need to stay pure for our daughter since you are breastfeeding her. And they gave her CBD. Apparently, CBD made it worse. Now, if you want additional details on this particular case, please look at my previous videos. This particular video is going to cover day 4, part 1, which was this Friday. Now, this is why I wanted to respond to this comment, because a lot of people are commenting about postpartum depression. Not once has postpartum depression been brought up in the case. Multiple people are assuming that that's what it is, but let's talk about what this psychologist had to say. Now, this is McClendon Garrett. I took notes. She is from the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health. She is testifying on the behalf of the defense. And she talks about the fact that she actually evaluated Chloe twice. And she stated that when they talked, she told her about an unstable early childhood life that she had. They moved around a lot, and she actually would run away a lot to move in with different boys. She even moved out of state one year to move in with a boy. She had suicidal ideation early on and, in fact, was cutting herself. She had an attempted overdose. She always, apparently for many years, utilized marijuana, cocaine, and other drugs. Chloe also shared that at one point in her life, she was prescribed an antidepressant. She doesn't know if it was from a pediatrician or a psychologist. She just shared that with her. Now, they go over the 2 times she met her. When she initially met her, she was upbeat, having, talking about all the projects that she was working on in the jail. However, when she saw her a month later, she realized she was crying, she was disheveled, she expressed sadness and feelings of worthlessness. Now, one of the things they address is the fact that when she would start taking medication, she'd stop taking medication. It was like once she felt better, she stopped. So they were constantly struggling with that. She was hearing things that also started in her teenage years, but she was also having thoughts of paranoia. Pretty much if anyone, looked at her a certain way, she just thought that they just didn't feel that she should be alive, that she was against them, etc. Chloe shared that her paranoia got worse about 3 months prior to her unaliving her daughter. She was starting to feel like what the cult was telling her, her husband, the additional wives. Well, the additional wives didn't talk about that because if you watch the previous videos, then you know that in this particular cult, women cannot really talk. I mean, their job is to take care of the kids. The conversations are had between men. So she shared that she felt that just the things that they had been teaching her about were starting to feel off, and she stopped believing in them. She started seeing things and feeling that she actually wasn't supposed to be in this world. She did tell her that she was given CBD oil, even though she was begging for help. In fact, the family friend who testified again, if you see the previous videos, who he's special to, but he shared that he approached the husband and was like, I'm really concerned about her. Something is going on. And that he was like, no, she's breastfeeding. She has to stay pure for the baby. And they agreed to give her CBD oil. However, the CBD oil, in fact, made it worse. And her paranoia just continued to escalate. The doctor was actually concerned, and she talks a little bit about the fact that when Chloe met her husband, Chloe was 17 years old. She met him at the age of 16 at a bus station. He gave her her number. He gave her his number, and she called him around the age of 17, and they met up. So she shares that someone that is desperate to be loved and someone that is maybe, doesn't feel that they have a stable life are going to be attracted to someone that is older and that maybe can take care of them and give them that security that they are seeking. And apparently this happens often. She also shared, Chloe did, that when she went to go live with him and be her, his wife, Ryan's wife, she shared that he had another wife previously and that wife, for whatever reason, had left. Come to find out, she had actually escaped in the middle of the night with the baby. When she got with him, he made her get off of the drugs that she was on. Remember, she was doing marijuana, cocaine, and other illicit drugs. And he made sure that she got off of everything because it was frowned upon. So, again, that's kind of one of the reasons why she doesn't like being medicated. And she struggles with staying on the medication. Because once she'd start feeling better, she was like, I'm good now. Now, they talk about what happened when her parents showed up. Because see, multiple people are like, oh my God, she escaped multiple times. Well, let's talk about that. She was on a phone that was monitored. And apparently, that's when she told her parents to please come pick her up. And her parents showed up, and Ryan took the daughter and made it clear to her that unless she returned, she would never see her daughter again. So she also felt as if, one of the other things that she talks about is when she went back home to him, she felt that while she was breastfeeding the baby, she was downloading her sins into the baby. The fact that he was married when she got with him. The fact that now they had this open marriage. Are they sinning? And that she felt that the baby and her shared those sins. They also talked about the fact that when everything was kind of telling her to unalive herself. So if people passed by her and looked at her a certain way, she would feel that, hey, they're telling me to unalive myself. She even talks about the fact that they had a sermon, I think it was the day of the passing of the child or when everything happened. And the sermon was about death and accepting that death is something that will be coming in the future. And she took it as it's her time to go. They talk about the fact that she was vulnerable from day one. From the day he got her at 17 years old, she was vulnerable because of all the episodes and things that she had dealt with previously. And that the thing is that with her situation, essentially, she's not going to ever get better. They did say that she suffered from schizophrenia and mood, so it's schizoaffective disorder, which means that she has hallucinations and delusions. There were times where she felt that she had special powers and could read people's minds. And then there were other times where she could hear things. And the problem with that is that that's not something that's going to go away. That is something that as time passes, because you're not getting the help that you need, it's going to get worse. And they weren't helping her at all. She talks about the fact that with this disease or this, issue, you have episodes that come and go. And that even in treatment, you can be on medication. You constantly have to be monitored for the rest of your life because your body gets used to the medication and it's going to need to be adjusted. I'm going to continue in part 2. If you're following me, you know that Chloe Driver is currently being tried for unaliving her 1-year-old daughter. The trial is called the Cult Mom Murder Trial. Why? Because she wasn't a cult. She was one of 3 wives. The prosecution's opening statement stated, no, she was jealous. That's why she unalived her 1-year-old, and she tried to unalive herself because she wanted the husband all to herself. Okay. The defense is stating absolutely not. That is not the case. She actually met her husband when she was 17. He was 38 years old. He then added 2 additional wives. They were in a cult where they were controlled. She tried to escape multiple times, and unfortunately, she was brought back each time. First time she tried to escape, she had called her mom. Her mom came and picked her up. And what did he do? Well, the phone was monitored. So he realized that she had called her mother. He took the child and disappeared. Okay. Sent her Facebook messages and text messages letting her know that if she did not come back to them, she would not see her daughter again. She was breastfeeding full time and she was going crazy. She ended up having to go back. And in fact, he sent an Uber to her. She had no idea where the child was or where she was going. That was the first time. Second time she tried to escape, she ran out of the apartment where she was at, screaming in the middle of the street for somebody to call 911. They drag her back in. Lady calls 911. What has happened to the lady? She gets hit by a car, and the friend that's also in the cult punched her and actually blew her eye socket. Yeah. So the previous video was the forensic psychologist who went over multiple details about Chloe's history, how she was raised, her childhood, how she was in a fragile state when she met her husband. And she essentially was extremely vulnerable because someone that went through what she went through in her childhood was looking for someone to take care of her, which is why they usually go and they go be with someone that's older. So this is part 2 of that forensic psychologist testimony. Please, if you have not seen the previous video, please do. So her name is McClendon Garrett. This is our friend McClendon Garrett. And she actually spoke to her twice. She evaluated her in between those 2 times over 4 hours. Apparently it's more. That's more than the normal. And she talks about the fact, as I mentioned, she had an unstable childhood. And she didn't bring up the husband at all. She didn't bring up the kids. I mean, the wives. What she did bring up was, look, I was hearing things. I had a lot of paranoia. I kept telling them I needed help. But because he didn't believe in medicine, they gave me CBD. They don't know where the CBD came from, but apparently it made her much more paranoid, made her much more irate. And in fact, it got a lot worse. In fact, the day that she unalived her 1-year-old daughter, that day she had gone and attended a sermon, and the sermon talked about death. And one of the delusions is the fact that, well, if they're talking about that subject, that must mean that it's time for me to go. And so anyways, I wanted to finalize her testimony saying this. As I mentioned, she was very vulnerable when she got with him. She had been doing other drugs at the age of 17. And so he made her kind of get rid of all the drugs and all of that. She wanted medication. He made it very clear that's not happening. You do have to stay pure. And they don't believe in modern medicine. So what's interesting about all of this is that they then talk about how she was isolated from everyone else. She talks about the fact that she was so concerned because of her isolation and how that in itself can exacerbate an already a negative situation, or in her case, a diagnosis. In her current situation, she was not allowed to speak to anyone unless they were being recruited for the cult. Okay? So her only friends were the sister wives and whoever else was spending time with them. They weren't allowed to have phones unless they were monitored. So if they called anyone, texted anyone, all of that was monitored and recorded. They weren't allowed to have jobs unless it was needed. Apparently her entire life, she only worked 2 weeks, and it was apparently in a motel changing bed sheets. They weren't allowed to purchase anything, walk into a store, do any of that. That simply was not allowed. And they talk about the fact that the forensic psychologist diagnosed her with schizoaffective disorder. So it's 2 things, a schizophrenia and a mood disorder in one, because she was hallucinating. So she talked about the fact that she felt that she had special magic and that she could read people's minds. But then also she was hearing things. And then also if like someone was talking in a group and she walked up and they were quiet, that meant that she shouldn't be there. She should unalive herself. There's no reason for her to exist in this world. They talk about the fact that, with that type of disorder, ignoring it and not giving someone medication is only going to make it worse, because it's something that's never going to go away. She is going to have that condition, and it's going to cause episodes, which she had plenty of those leading up to when her daughter was unalived. And in fact, it talks about the fact that if you have any disorder like schizophrenia, you'll be on medication for life, and you'll be monitored on that medication, because over time, it has to be increased, because your body will get used to it. And you have to be vigilant and watch out for symptoms at all times. Because a lot of people that take medication think I'm feeling better, and they stop taking it, which happened to her. She stopped taking medication in the hospital after she unalived her daughter. And it got to the point where she was like, I don't want to take the medication. I feel so much better. Well, guess what? She started hurting herself. She started having paranoia, and it got to the point where they actually had to restrain her until she started taking her medication again. Now, they even talk about the fact that when she went about a week before this incident happened, she went back to her parents' house to pick up the stuff that she had left. Her mom noticed she had a black eye. And that's actually the black eye that they talk about apparently in the hospital. It was so concerning that even the detective made her turn over and all of that just to make sure there were no additional bruises. Now, keep in mind that she is currently on medication, multiple medications. They actually had to constantly change her medications because her condition, it's like if something works for a couple weeks, it can all of a sudden shift and they need to try something else. So essentially, that's why they've diagnosed her with this condition, and that's why she's claiming insanity, because in reality, she needs help, and she needs help instead of prison. Also, they talk about the fact that when she was breastfeeding her daughter, and I say this in the previous video, when she was breastfeeding her daughter, she felt that she was downloading sin into her daughter, because when she got with him, he had been married. Keep in mind that particular wife actually left in the middle of the night with their child because she too had been trying to get away. And so she felt that, was God going to forgive her for being with a man that was already married? But then they had additional sister wives. Were they sinning? So a lot of doubt was going in through her mind. So she essentially felt that the only way out of this situation was to unalive herself and her daughter. And that in fact, when she woke up and realized that she was alive, she was screaming, crying, that she should have been gone. There was no reason for her to be there. Now, I will do another part where the prosecution team actually then asked her questions, or they cross-examining her. I will keep updating you guys. Tomorrow Monday is day 5. Talk to you soon. Chloe Driver is currently being tried for unaliving her daughter. If you aren't aware of the details of this case, I'm going to give you a quick recap before I jump into day 4. Chloe, at the age of 16, met this man by the name of Ryan. Now, she was at a bus station. They exchanged numbers. When she turned 17, she reached out to him again. They met up and she went to go live with him. He was 38 years old at the time. Now, Ryan actually runs a cult. So initially, she was what we all thought the first wife, and then 2 other women in the couple of years after joined their marriage. Now, what's interesting is that in this trial, it has come out that he actually had another wife who left in the middle of the night with their child because she was trying to escape. Now, to talk about Chloe, on December 8th of 2020, Chloe locked herself in the room with her 1-year-old daughter. She unalived her 1-year-old daughter and then even tried to unalive herself in the same manner. Unfortunately, baby did not survive. Chloe, as you can see, did. Now, the prosecution is stating that the only reason she did that is because she was jealous. She wanted, to be by herself with her husband. The defense is stating absolutely not. She's been trying to leave, and there was 2 attempts for her. There were 2 attempts of her leaving, and each time she was either dragged back or her daughter was then taken where she had to they forced her to come back. In addition to that, The forensic psychologist, and I have those videos, part 1 and part 2, talked about the fact that she did have a mental condition. Specifically, I believe she has schizophrenia and a mood disorder because she was not only imagining things. Excuse you, Google. She was imagining things. There were times that she thought that she could read people's minds. And then there were other times where she was breastfeeding the child and she said that she felt that she was downloading her sins into the baby because she started questioning all of the things that he was telling her. Keep in mind, they controlled, or he controlled, what the wives wore, who they spoke to. They couldn't speak to anyone outside of their group unless they were recruiting them. They had no access to funds. So even though they all had different bank accounts in their names, he essentially was the only one. Like, they had to get permission and approval to actually utilize any of the money in those accounts. Now, this is the final part of the forensic psychologist. Again, if you want to watch part 1 and part 2, look in the previous videos. And this is the prosecution's cross, because this forensic psychologist is testifying on the behalf of the defense.
Not exactly. And let me explain, because I know you're looking at me like I'm crazy. But she had talked about in the time when she went to try and get her mother, of trying to put together some money, trying to access some money, trying to move money towards her parents. So there was some indication already that she was trying to move money around, trying to save up, trying to do something that would help her escape with her daughter. So I didn't specifically ask her whether she had access on that day. So I couldn't say that it was inconsistent with her financial situation on the day.
Now, for transparency, what's happening is that in that particular day, they found $1,000 in the bag and blank checks in her name, a debit card in her name. And so the prosecution is like, look, she had access to money all the time. She lied to you. And she's like, no, because she showed that she had to pretty much scramble to get money, to save money, to try to get away. What's interesting to me is that she had $66,000 in the bank account in her name, right? Nobody's asking where that money came from, even though nobody had a job. Apparently, he had the other two wives file for fraudulent loans, small business loans during COVID. Yeah, and they got $150K, but they weren't able to touch it. Now, again, that's the prosecution is also bringing up that she spoke to a different psychologist, and then with that psychologist, she shared that she knew that what she did was wrong at the time, in a sense of after she did it, she was just desperate. She couldn't believe she had done it. That also she wanted to be alone with him. Again, back to the whole, oh my gosh, she was jealous and wanted him to herself. When in fact, they've talked about her stating that she started questioning if she should be in a relationship where there's multiple wives, because she feels that God may not forgive her, and that in fact it was a sin. Not that she was jealous of the other wives at all. So this is a topic that was never in conversation with this particular forensic psychologist, because they didn't talk about the other wives. She said she didn't even bring them up. Like, that wasn't even a thing. We were talking about her mental state. Now let's continue looking in the video about that particular day and what may have triggered her to do this to her daughter.
I want to talk about the specific trigger that caused her to kill Hannah. Did she tell you that Benjamin throwing her the dirty shirt for Hannah was the last thing that triggered her, that nobody wanted her or Hannah to be here?
I believe that was the last trigger, yeah.
Okay, so she needs a clean shirt for the baby. She tells you he throws her a shirt up to the window. He's in the driveway and tosses her a shirt up to the window, and it's dirty.
That's my recollection.
Okay, and she indicated that was the trigger that told her nobody that wanted her or the baby to be there.
That, on top of 3 months of seeing signs and symbols of those things, it was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess.
Okay, but on the 8th, in terms of her state of mind on the 8th when she committed the act, that is what she relayed was her trigger for committing the act, correct?
It's what she relayed was the last thing that happened before she had triggered the act. I mean, nobody can be parsed into one moment in time. Everybody's life builds upon itself. So if 3 months of seeing everything as being a sign that she's supposed to kill herself, the fact that it was a shirt that finally tipped it over, the last thing that happened, doesn't mean that's the trigger. It's the last thing, the final thing.
Right, but if this jury is going to evaluate what her state of mind was at the time of the crime, you'd agree that her state of mind closest in time of the crime was what was happening in that room with Hannah on that day.
Not really, because like I said, we're not just a moment in time. My sitting here in this chair, speaking to all of you, and having butterflies in my stomach and, anxiety is not just because I'm sitting here right now. It's because I've sat here before. It's because I've sat there before. It's because I've experienced it before. And all those experiences lead up to how we interpret events. And unfortunately, in this driver's case, all of those experiences were, you shouldn't be here, you're bad, you're going to be punished, the world is going to end, and you and your daughter are sinful and you need to not be here anymore. And every single new thing is not a separate thing, it's an additional thing. It's adding a weight on top of a weight, on top of a weight, on top of a weight, until the bench finally crashes.
How much information did she give you about exactly how she killed Hannah? Was her memory intact? Did she have any problems giving you the play-by-play?
She basically said it was fuzzy. She remembered that she had done it. She remembered that she had harmed herself and harmed her baby. That was, I didn't get first I stabbed her and then I stabbed her there and then we didn't do that.
So she did not go into the details of what transpired to the daughter, play-by-play. And she explains that she just let her know, hey, this happened. I did this to my daughter and myself. And that they didn't discuss the play-by-play because she's like, at the time, that wasn't relevant to me. My job is to discuss, how are you feeling? What is happening today? And they also talk about the fact that they do at the end, because the prosecution wanted to make it seem like, oh, she's claiming insanity because you told her from the get-go what could happen. And she said, no, we don't discuss anything until I have all of the information that is part of my job. At the end, we do discuss. We discuss plea deals. We discuss all of things that could happen. But that's after my evaluation is complete. I don't provide her any information for her to volunteer or fake it, because that's one of her evaluations, is to make sure they're not faking it. They're not changing things to make it appear a certain kind of way. So this is the final day of day 4. I'll give you guys day 5 in a minute, which is actually her mom's testimony. Talk to you soon.